started looking into the whole process of what Japanning was. There's a kind of a misconception of Japan. When you see a lot of times when say it's Japan, it's Japan. Well, that Japan is how they used to do the boxes. The Japanese, would do the very highly decorated boxes. They would put a coat on, and they would let it dry, polish it, put another coat on, and they put about 50 or 60 coats on, and they were gorgeous. Real lot of depth to it. In the early 17 or to mid 1700s, the Chinese came up with a way to circumvent doing all that work in their culture. It's the same as what they're doing now. They came up with the formula for Japan, which is Japanne, and that is what it's on the fans now. And basically, that formula is it's basically applying a mineral to a metal object, either being steel, brass, or iron. And let's see, it was really a good presentation. What is Japan? Covering a hard, durable, non-porous object with a mineral with application of heat. Coating cast iron or steel with a mixture of gilsonite. Gilsonite or asphaltum is the mineral that is used. Tree resin, there's a variety of different types of tree resin that go in it. Linseed oil. Linseed oil acts as a dryer and allows the combinations to cure, and then turpentine to make it so you can apply it. When heat's put to that, it sticks to the finish. There were, I think all the early fans were pretty much covered in Japan, as were typewriters, Singer sewing machines, adding machines. Those were all Japan. And more of my nice slides. I had pictures of baking it. The way you make the Japan is you take linseed oil and you heat it up, and then you add to that the tree resin, and then to the tree resin you go ahead and add the asphaltum or gilsonite, and then as it's cooling down, hopefully you add the turpentine, and then that mixes together. That's the only way to get it to all come together. If you don't heat it up, which I did many times from not knowing how to do it, it just doesn't work. And I've been able to fiddle around with it, and I actually have created some green Japan and some, it's a kind of a purple or bluish type Japan, but unfortunately it kind of turns dark when I stove it. Let's see.
When you say heat it up, what do you mean?
On top of a stove, you heat it up to around 350 degrees, and in doing this, it was difficult because there were a lot of variables have changed over the years. Turpentine is not the same now as it used to be. The resins are not the same, and the asphaltum or gilsonite is not the same. They, in the United States, they mine the asphaltum or gilsonite out of it's Idaho, or maybe Idaho, but anyways, in 2010, that mine dried up. That was the same mine that produced the gilsonite from when they did the fans. So the new mining stuff, it's got a different flash point or to heat it, so you have to do a different formula. It's got to be actually quite hotter to make it flow like it does on the paint.
So you put it on hot?
Pardon me?
You put it on hot?
No, I'll get to that. This is just making the paint. This was just making the paint, and then you take and you have to strain it because it's got the mineral in it, and That can take up to about 10 hours of different straining. You have to get it real down very fine, or you end up with all sorts of stuff in the finish. When they first started Japanning, they started by brushing it, and I've done 3 different examples of how it was applied. This was brushed on here, and then a stove. You go ahead and put it in the stove for about 3 hours at over 370 degrees, and you can't get it much over about 390 or it'll burn. So you've got to watch the stove quite a lot. Take it out, let it cool, and then put another coat on it, and then do the process again. This one has 2 coats on it. Sometimes I'll put 3 coats. When I started doing this, I did a survey among some of the members, and Rick was one of them, and put an article in our magazine. And I had no conception that they did as much work to these things as I thought. I figured modern manufacturing, you put 1 coat of paint on, it's out the door. Once I put 2 coats on, it's like, well, this is starting to look like it did. Once I put 2 coats on and then started wet sanding it and put a 3rd coat on, it's like, well, I think I've got something here. It actually worked out. But I'll pass this around. This that is brushed on and baked with 2 coats. I think everybody, at least from what I can tell, and I obviously don't know for sure, but all the manufacturers started out, with brushing them. And then they started either dipping them or cupping them, where you would take the fan and you would have a bucket full of Japan, and then you would pour it on, it would run off, or you would dip it. Now I dipped this one, and in my presentation I have some real nice photos of the whole process of dipping it and doing it. I did this last weekend. And this was dipped, and I'm pretty sure that's how Westinghouse did it. Generally, their finishes are pretty nice, the tanks especially. But this has got 3 coats on it. It was dipped. I don't have the luxury of having 100 gallons of Japan, so what I did was called hydro dipping, where you go ahead and put a 5-gallon bucket of water, and then you float about 1 inch worth of Japan on top of it. You lower it down, the hydronic force of the water makes the paint stick to the metal. You pull it back out, let it drip off, stove it, do it a couple more times, and this is how you end up.
Like application of the decals.
Pardon me?
Like when they dip for the decals.
Right, yeah. A lot of times I've seen where they will take a bucket of paint and put different types of paint in there, and then it comes up with a different design. They do that for like camouflage type stuff. This GE base was sprayed.
If that's brushed, that's good.
My preferable way to do it. It's a lot easier to spray than it is to dip. Actually, brushing it's not all bad. It's relatively easy, but you can get some real drips to it. So you can take a look at that. They all look pretty much the same, which I think is kind of interesting. The tank base, comes out very pretty much.
So do you buff these after you?
No, they're not been buffed.
Really?
Yeah. It's just how it comes out.
Beautiful.
You wet sand between them?
I have wet sanded, the only one I wet sanded was the tank base. I did that on the 2nd coat, and then just dipped it into the 3rd.
Is the material hot when you actually brush it on?
No,
Is it?
no.
Okay,
I tried
and you
that.
just put it in the
I have
oven.
tried a variety of things. I couldn't figure out how they got it. When I was first doing it and only doing 1 coat on there,
Right.
it's like, how did they get it on there so thick?
Yeah.
How is it, especially with the Westinghouse
Oh,
stuff?
wow.
I mean, their stuff generally looks pretty good after 100 years. And
Oh, yeah.
I just couldn't figure it out. How on earth did they get this on here that thing? So I tried heating up Japan, I tried
Right.
heating up the parts.
Right.
The parts, when they got them, they were spanking, they were clean. I mean, they just came out of a foundry, so they, they were molten. Stuff we get, it's got 100 years worth of grease and oil on it, and you gotta clean it. You've got to, I have to take it down to bare metal, and then sometimes I will stick it in the oven at 500 degrees to bleed any
Right.
grease out of it. But that'll come up a little bit later. It creates a tremendous amount of smoke when you're doing it, so my wife has been very tolerant about that. You have an axle fan that goes out and shoots out at her neighbor. I don't like her. So she doesn't like us now. It was interesting, when I was trying to find out how to do all this, there was not much written about it, and then I found out the reason that happened is that in the early days of Japan, it was pretty profitable, and so the owners of the Japan shops would, at 5 o'clock, they would send their workers home. They would stay all night and do the process. The workers came in the morning, it was done. What had happened prior to that is the workers were going out and starting their own Japan shops, and so hence there was not much written about it. There's no patents on any Japan that I've looked at. There's very few recipes or formulas for it. Those that do exist don't work anymore because of the different materials. I had to fiddle with it to make it, it actually work. I even got a picture of my stove in there. I asked our membership some questions about Japan, and I can either go ahead and talk about this or have you ask questions and then refer back to this on how it is. As I said, I think my presentation probably covered it.
It is.
Better as a PowerPoint than it does me just standing up here. I'm not exactly that organized, or I have not put as much thought into it since yesterday, saying, well, God, you gotta do this differently than what you did do it. What is Japan? How is it made? It's made by, as I said, you go ahead and heat up the different ingredients and then filter it and then apply it. How's it different than other finishes? Everybody here has had it, probably knows. It's harder, it's durable, it's a mineral where nothing else is a mineral that's been put on the cast iron that I'm aware of.
Back up when you said filter, what do you mean by filter?
Use a paint strainer, start out at about, probably 400 down to about 120, I think is about
Is it when it's hot or just cool?
it's warm when I do that. It
Warm,
works
okay.
much better, to go through it. I've gone through a lot of strainers to try to figure that out too. I got one of those immersion blenders that I go ahead and stick in there, and it gets stuff. And I've put it in blenders before, and you can go to the Goodwill and get a blender for $5. So it's you
Yeah,
throw them away when they're all done.
When you do it 20 times.
Right. Well, I have cleaned a few blenders, but actually the immersion stick works really well, because you can stick it in a bucket of turpentine and it comes clean, and it looks well used.
Would a centrifuge be able to get the solids?
I don't know, it's a good thought. That's a good thought.
I don't know if it's separate other.
It might. You
might
may end
separate all your
up, you
own.
might end up with,
But it might just
linseed
take the
oil.
solids, it might just take the solids from the
Right,
bottom. I
right.
don't know.
I've even considered, when I was doing the hydro dipping, I've considered putting it in water, because theoretically, the solids would drop out to the bottom of the bucket. You would lose some, and as long as you had enough in there, you could scoop it out of there. I've not tried that yet. It's relatively pricey to to make, it costs a little over $200 a gallon to make without any labor in it. That's just raw materials. The turpentine I get it from England. The resins that I get, tree resins, it's old tree resin, that comes from Romania. The linseed oil is it's just a cold processed linseed oil. And then the asphaltum I get from a place in Chicago, so, and it's mined in the US.
Do you have a recipe, this part, so much of this part, so much of this part, so much of this part equals a gallon? Do you have that,
I do.
printed up for us?
To present, no, I don't. I am gonna, people have asked me that, can you give me the recipe of this, that, the other thing? And, I have it written down, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. I battled with sharing it. I was asked to share it several times, and at this point, I'm not ready to do that, I don't think.
So you're just doing this for yourself? or
Pretty much.
you're
I've
not,
had a few people that I have Japan for, and that's about it. It's not, by no means is it a business or anything. It was more of an obsession with me to figure it out. You know, how, it's pretty neat. I mean, I really enjoy it, and I know everybody else would enjoy it. People have asked me, well, why don't you sell it? There's liability issues that come into it. There's, I think, unfortunately, there's probably liability issues in even giving the recipe out. It's not easy to do. This thumb right here, I don't know if you can see it, I got 4th degree burns making the Japan a couple of years ago. And give it to Rick Hill and say, here, Rick, here's a formula. Well, he comes back with his attorney, well, he burned his hand. Whose fault was all? So that's primarily the main reason. I do have it written down, and in case anything happens to me, that it's available. So, what type of surfaces could be Japan? Cast iron, white metal. White metal doesn't work very well because it's got a lot of gases in the inside and it bubbles out through Japan. Brass, Japan's very well. How do you surface prep? Remove the old finish, grinding, sanding, grinding. We've got a big Balador grinder with a big wheel on it, a wire wheel, and that takes most of it off. Cleaning and handling of bare metal, you have to be certain you don't get oil on it because it will bleed through or you'll get spots in the Japan, so you need to wear gloves. Outgassing, you have that. Temperature of the surface prior to Japanning, as long as it's above 60 degrees, it's good. If it's colder than 60 degrees, you get little white spots that come out in it. I forget what they call those, but I read about it, and it's true. I was trying to figure out why all these little crystals were coming out because it was too cold. Application: brush, roller, don't roll it. Gun, dipping. Does it flow out and level itself? Yes, it does. Does it fill in imperfections? Yeah, it really does. Can it be recoated? Yes. I have recoated it. I've taken old Japan and sanded it down and then degreased it and then put it on top of it. It doesn't look the same. It's not as pretty. You end up getting little imperfections in the paint. Baking, the temperature, again, it's got to be above 370 to be considered Japan. Time, 2.5 to 3 hours.
What's your electric bill at the end of all this?
I don't know, my wife pays the bills. She does bring it up
I
every
think
now
I
and
think
then.
I would take it.
No, she has mentioned in the past, how often you been doing that? And, 'cause you're running, last year I did a lot of stuff, and, I was probably baking every day for up to 6 hours. Well, that's the oven runs at 370 for 6 hours each day. Durability, how long before it's fully cured? It's cured as soon as it cools. As soon as you take it out of the oven, it reaches room temperature, it's ready to go. Polishing or flattening, it can be polished, you can put it on a buffer. I have taken it and used metal polish on top of what you see here. It comes out looking a little bit more like the fans that we see. But I don't know if that's it, or it's the fact that they're 100 years old, that this is a mineral, and it's very similar to glass. You know, if you look at 100-year-old glass, it's got waves in it. I believe that the Japan's probably moving still too, because of being a mineral. And it's had how many cleanings on it, how many times has it been rubbed over 100 years, polished or whatever. But this is as close as I've been able to get. I think it looks pretty good. Overcoating, lettering, stripes, gold leaf, other. I have not done much of that other than everybody else putting numbers on the speed, the switches, and that's it. You've got to go ahead and clean it with acetone before you try to stick anything on it, it won't stick.
Try that again. You clean with acetone, what acetone does one then?
It gets it, there's a little bit of a film on the finish, just from the oils being on there, and you take the acetone and it just cleans that off. Because you can take a piece of tape and stick on there, and it won't stick right now. But,
Acetone cleans it off.
I brought some Japan. I think it smells just wonderful.
Yeah, you kinda have to.
Yeah.
Is that an addiction?
Wow.
It's unique. It's not offensive like an acrylic.
Did it solid smell?
Sinus issues.
Smell of
Yeah,
napalm in the
yeah.
morning. Yeah, that's it right there.
Driveway in a can.
I'm not gonna stick it way up to my nose.
No.
Yeah, do the chemistry right now. It's turpentine for certain.
Do the wine smell.
Yeah.
Switch
Right,
it around.
right.
Yeah.
We. I have probably dumped out, I have gone through about 50 pounds of asphaltum so far, and it takes about a pound to make a gallon. So I've dumped out probably 50 gallons of mixture that didn't work. And, this stuff's finally, and every time I do it, I refine it, it comes out better.
You didn't pour it down the drain.
Yeah,
No.
You didn't pour it down the drain.
No, not down the drain.
On cardboard, let it dry out.
Right, well, no. It smells like old. In Kalamazoo, we have a recycling center that just takes paint,
Varnish.
and so.
perfect.
What's an old?
Yeah, they just, they probably drink. They put it drink.
Oh my word.
Oh, my word.
Anyway, very color,
Vary the color as far as blacks,
as far as not black.
not black. I have tried, tried white, because some of the old fans, the European fans are white, and I don't think it was Japan. I don't.
Some of the early American fans have a dark green or.
I've done green, I have done green, right, and green's very difficult because, when you bake it, it starts turning brown, and so you get up more of a brownish type green, but I have done green. As I said, I did, what it was Prussian green,
Right.
that I spilled all over my finger, and.
Smell it, right?
Wow, it's thinner than I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a mess. Fortunately, my wife works part-time, and she was at work.
It's real thin.
The stuff caught on fire, and I went, oh my God, what am I gonna do? So I grabbed it and threw it in a slop sink right behind the stove. When I was doing that, it came out and landed on my thumb, and that was all, what it was is linseed oil and resin. And so the resin was just, it was like molten resin. My thumb was swelled up about like that, and it was the blue. It was the Prussian blue. It went all over the place. This was in February. Our dog was upstairs. My wife bought me, when I started doing this, she bought me a special smoke detector. It alerts you on your phone. And this thing's going off. Evacuate, evacuate. Your basement is on fire. Evacuate, evacuate. So this wasn't stopping, and this was going on. The poor dog's upstairs, because it set off the smoke detectors in the rest of the house. And mind you, this is Michigan in February. I fortunately had a window fan in a spare bedroom. I opened up the house and turned the fan on and cooled it down in a hurry, and then started cleaning up. It took an unbelievable amount of time to clean up, and yet my wife found all sorts of little spots of Prussian blue. You know, one of the interesting things that, after I did the article in the Fan Collector magazine, I got a couple of responses from people that were interested in it, and the one main person that was interested in it was Jan Hendricks in Australia. And we started chatting back and forth about this, that, and the other thing, and he said, could you send me some? And I said, well, I don't think it's quite, you know, the stuff's not good enough yet. He said he didn't care. So anyways, I sent him some. He loved it. He had, I don't know how many of you are familiar with any of his postings or whatever. Jan's a real talented guy. He's in his mid-50s, retired Boilermaker. He's had an interesting life. But he loved it. He has probably got the largest Morelli collection in the world. I think he's got 75, 85 Morellis. And he had gotten to a point in his fan collecting where he was getting sick of it. He was tired of doing this, that, and the other thing. He figured out after years how to make the Morelli cages. Nobody else could figure out how to do a final crimp on the ring, and he figured it out. He won't tell anybody how to do that either. But he started restoring his fan. It kind of rejuvenated him, and he said he was so thankful that he got fired up again. Since then, I have sent Jan, 2 or 3 gallons of Japan, and he has, one of the things that he made this for me. This is a Morelli Visa that he made. And the reason I brought it is that this is a Japan, and it works just as well in Australia as it does here. But it's a nice fan. He's a real craftsman.
Wow. Cool.
And, you know, and I guess the nicest thing, and probably our entire organization, is the camaraderie. You know, I mean, I think everybody feels that, you know, it's a good group of folks. But, that's pretty much it. As I say, I'm sorry I had prepared this PowerPoint presentation that I thought was real good. But, you know, maybe next year I'll bring it and show it. Yes.
When you're hydro dipping, 2 things. How thick a layer is on top, and then do you just mask off?
The holes for the base may have been in it. These holes, anything that was threaded was not there. They threaded all this stuff after it was Japan.
After those
Right, and
Japan.
they couldn't have done that. If you look at, you know, mating surfaces, there's no Japan on it when you go ahead and look at, take apart a fan. You know, they didn't, you know, mine, that's not true with the stuff that I do. I end up scraping it off. But it's interesting. You know what I mean? How often would you do that in production now? You wouldn't have a finished product and then go drill holes in it. And the finish allowed them to do that. Any other questions?
During what time period was Japan used?
Oh, okay, good one. That was in my presentation. Japanning was done, as best I can tell, from very early fans. Some form of Japanning was done. As I said, this method was Chinese from the mid-1700s. Japanning was done up to about 1926, and there were a few of the companies that still did it after that, but not many. The reason for that is that DuPont came out with a lacquer at that point. It was a mistake how they found it. They had a stack of movie film that was set out in the sun. While it dripped down, it all melted, and they figured out somebody figured out how to take that and transform it into a coating, which they did. And it basically, after about 1926. That's at the same time the spray gun came out. Commercial spray guns came out in about 1925, 26. That's when you saw these things change from I don't know with Westinghouse if they probably sprayed. Now, GE is a different animal. They didn't use quality at all. The paint that they used was out of Japan. It was they didn't put the resin in it, and they didn't use asphalt in it. They used a powder that's called Candle Black. And that is why when you get an old GE fan, the finish is like it is for an Emerson or Westinghouse, is that it was meant to look good, kind of on the showroom floor. It was much cheaper. Same thing at Henry Ford. They didn't Japan their cars. Their cars were coated in a similar coating, and then they varnished them. They varnished them and put them in showroom. Anything else?
Do you sell to Japan? Say a guy wanted to do it himself? Would you sell a pint or a?
I have only done that once, and again, it comes down to liability issues.
Oh, well, okay, all right, gotcha,
I'm concerned
gotcha.
about that.
Right,
And, I wish it wasn't.
right,
I
right.
don't know if there's any
Because
attorneys here,
it's-
tell me how to get around that.
Looks like you got it down though.
I hope so.
how to
It's
do
fun.
it.
It is
Yeah.
fun, and I mean, I'm serious, I would love to go ahead and do it, but and maybe I'm just blowing smoke. I've been
Right,
offered to sell it.
Right, right.
But, as I said, I've got it written down, and what I do is I have it written down, and it's addressed to Jan Hendricks. If something happens to me, he gets the recipe.
Right, right.
You sell touch-up bottles?
Pardon me?
Touch-up bottles? Just the little ones you put out on the
Oh, I'll
porch?
give you a touch-up.
Okay.
The problem with that is you gotta stow it.
Ah,
Now, Morelli, when they painted their fans, the statters were in them. They were assembled. I've got a picture on my PowerPoint presentation of their ovens. They have a big spray booth here, and that goes right into a big oven, and it goes very slow. It takes about 2 hours to get through. They sprayed them, and it shows the statters right in there. I don't know how they did that. You would think the heat would, mess them up. Yes,
Have you tried to asphalt them from foreign sources or just the US sources?
just the US. I have seen where, I think you had mentioned on one of your posts that you had gotten some stuff from Burma or possibly. Okay, I'm wrong. So, anyways, yes, I think it's pretty much the same. It could be different. I was just, it's readily available in Chicago, so. Anything else?
I've seen different, discussions on it, but what, in your opinion, or anyone else's opinion, what's a good alternative to the?
An alternative? I don't know. People say, powder coating is possibly automotive paint. Certainly not Rust-Oleum.
Epoxy?
I don't know. I don't think I don't know. I don't think there's anything that really matches it. It's different. It has a different depth to it. I don't know. Yeah.
Old Japan won't reflow with heat, will it?
No, it'll burn off. I tried that. I tried to get it to redo it. Right. There's not much I've not done, really. I really, this has been a struggle. But it's been fun. It was fun when it finally came out. It was funny, I guess it was right before Madison, I had done 5 or 6 tank bases, and I took them there, and it was with a different formula. And one of the people that was on the group that I had summoned to go ahead and look at my work was Stefan Osdane, and showed it to Stefan, and I was pretty fired up. I had literally taken it out of the oven in the morning, it was still hot, and I put it in the car to drive to Madison. And anyways, I went and showed it to him, and he goes, oh, he said, can you muck it up a little bit? He said, I think you're probably at about 70%. And I was really hurt. I mean, I really felt, God, I really felt I'd gotten something. But it was a real wake-up call. That was when I went back and started doing more research, and I ended up buying a bunch of books from Europe on formulas, old books from the 1800s on formulas, and went through them, found bits and pieces of information on how to do this, what to do with amber in it, and the other things, and started putting that together. But the largest revelation I had was when I started putting the second and third coat on there. It's like, oh, this really, I couldn't conceive that manufacturers would do that. And they did. It was all craftsmanship. And I think we all probably, when we look at these fans, it wasn't about, quality was quality. It's not at all like it is today. But that's kind of how it worked out.
Do you think the manufacturers dipped most of their fans, or do you
I
think?
think that, I've seen pictures of GE having drying racks where they did the small parts. I do dip the small parts, because like if you're, like little clips and struts, when you
Right.
spray them, they fly all over the place. And so they're real easy just to dip. And now, I do know that, I think Westinghouse probably dipped all along. Emerson, I know that they brushed, and I know that they cupped. Because I've read about that, where they would take it or ladle it on there, and you actually on some of the, if you look up under in the necks, a lot of times you can see where there's splash, or you can see where it's been poured and there's been a drip come
Right.
down, and it's like, how did that get in there? They certainly didn't spray it, they didn't dip it.
Okay.
So it's different, but
Dipping would be more, be the most popular than that.
I don't know. I I do know, I read about, the brushers. Some of these guys were renowned for how fast they could brush. It really doesn't take long. I mean, the stuff flows out. I mean, it just, you put it on there and it just kind of drips off.
Spraying, you lose percentage overspray.
Oh, yeah. It goes to the neighbor. So-
Wasted money.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, when you spray your house or whatever, it's really quick, but, you probably get a gallon on and 4 gallons off.
How's your grass looking where the vent comes out?
The neighbors.
Neighbors?
It is funny. I will be doing it, and I'll take our dog out for a walk or something. I get about a half a block away, and I can smell asphalt.
Oh, shit.
I think you're operating a meth lab.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Do you have to sift your asphalt before you begin with it, or does it come all?
No, it comes as, I forgot, I was gonna bring some. It's a very fine powder when you get it. I don't remember how that's sized, but it's almost like a dust. It's a mess. It's an extremely messy process. When you make it, it's a mess. When you apply it, it's a mess. You stove it. The inside of my stoving oven is like got tar all over it.
So no
it's a
cakes
real-
in there?
You don't do that, your wife's,
No, I bought an apartment size oven, and it's perfect for it.
outside, detached garage, away from the house?
Basement, fan, neighbor.
It's okay.
Must love you.
Yeah, it's Michigan, come on, you can't, in February, you can't be out in the garage, unless you got a really big garage, it's heated. But it's not too bad. I mean, my wife and animals have gotten used to it. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.